For 600 years, the God of Israel fought for his people's attention and kept losing, not to Pharaoh, not to Babylon, and not to any army on earth, but he lost to a rain god with a wooden pole on a hilltop. His name literally meant Lord, and his worship offered feasts, fertility, and the promise that your crops would grow and your children would live, with massive temples that actually stood longer than the entire Roman Empire lasted in human history. And even after God sent real fire from heaven to prove this idol was absolutely nothing, Israel crawled right back to his altar the very next generation, making this the unbelievable story of Baal, the god Israel simply could not quit. At the end of this video, you will understand exactly why they couldn't. Because the system that made him irresistible did not die with the ancient world. It was completely rebranded, and it is still running today. So hit subscribe to uncover the truth. When Joshua led Israel across the Jordan around 1400 BC, they entered a world they had never lived in. Because for 40 years in the wilderness, every single need was met by God directly without them lifting a finger. They had manna every morning, water pouring from solid rock, and clothes that miraculously did not wear out, meaning not one of them had ever planted a seed and waited for rain. But then they crossed into Canaan and the manna stopped. Joshua chapter 5 verse 12 says, "The day after they ate the produce of the land, the manna ceased," meaning for the first time in a generation, Israel's survival depended not on a miracle at dawn, but on clouds that might never come. And in Canaan, absolutely everything depended on the clouds, because this was not Egypt, where the Nile flooded every year like clockwork and massive irrigation systems guaranteed the harvest. Since Canaan had absolutely no river to rely on for survival, it had two rainy seasons, the early rains of autumn and the late rains of spring, and if either one failed, absolutely everything failed. Crops withered, livestock died, and children went hungry in a land without refrigeration or grain reserves. Without trade agreements that could ship food from a neighboring empire, a failed rain season was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. And the Canaanites, who had been farming this land for centuries, had a system for ensuring the rains came. It was not a superstition or a primitive guess. It was an economic theology that had been running for generations, maintained by professional priests, funded by community contributions, and anchored in a mythology so sophisticated that scholars are still studying its text 3,000 years later. There is one crucial detail about this system that almost nobody talks about, and it explains everything that happened next, because the gods of Canaan were not spiritual in the way most people imagine today. They were entirely economic and deeply transactional. El offered rain, Asherah offered fertile wombs, and the entire system was transactional, meaning you perform the ritual and the god delivers the result, making religion function as a literal insurance policy where premiums were paid in grain, wine, flesh, and blood. Israel did not walk into superstition, they walked into an economy, and the question they faced was the most human question imaginable. Because you have a family, you have fields, and you have never farmed a single day in your entire life. Local farmer next to you has been growing crops on this soil for generations, and he tells you that he sacrifices to Baal, and the rain comes. So his family eats while yours does not, suggesting that perhaps you should try it too. He is not asking you to abandon your God, he is just asking you to be practical. And that was the world Israel walked into. But to understand why they stayed, you need to meet the specific God who was waiting for them. 1929, a farmer's plow struck a buried tomb on the coast of northern Syria, and French archaeologists arrived to uncover the ruins of a city called Ugarit, a powerful Bronze Age port buried and forgotten for over 3,000 years. Among the ruins, they found hundreds of clay tablets written in a language no one had ever seen before. And it took years to decipher, but when they did, they discovered something extraordinary dating to approximately 1400 to 1200 BC. These tablets contain the most complete portrait of Baal ever found, not the Bible's perspective, but Baal's own story told by his own worshippers, in their own words, in ancient texts officially called the Baal cycle, an epic written across 6 tablets. What they reveal is a god far more sophisticated than the wooden idol most people imagine, because Baal, specifically Baal-Hadad, was the terrifying god of storms, thunder, lightning, and rain. And his official titles were absolutely extraordinary to read. He was called the Rider on the Clouds, Prince, Lord of the Earth, and Lord of Rain and Dew, depicted holding a lightning bolt in one hand and a war mace in the other as a god who commanded the sky itself. Sacred mountain was Mount Zaphon on the modern Turkey and Syria border, where his palace was said to gleam above the clouds. But the mythology went far deeper than titles, because the Baal cycle tells of two massive cosmic battles. First, Baal defeats Yam, the god of chaos, and establishes his rule over the earth. But then comes the second battle where Baal descends to the underworld to confront Mot, the god of death and sterility, and Mot actually swallows him whole. Baal dies, and when Baal dies, the rains stop, the earth dries up, crops wither, famine grips the land, and everything begins to decay until his sister and consort Anat goes searching for him, violently confronts Mot, and Baal is restored to life. Rains return, the earth blooms, the harvest is saved, and this was a dying and rising god whose worshippers believed this cycle repeated every year, meaning Baal died in the scorching summer drought and rose with the heavy autumn rains. The entire religion was built around participating in that cycle, ensuring through ritual that Baal would rise again, that the rains would return, and that the land would produce, making him an agricultural insurance policy with centuries of highly satisfied customers. And here is the detail scholars have debated for decades, the one that makes this story personal to anyone who has read the Psalms, because one of Baal's most famous titles, Rider on the Clouds, actually appears in the Bible, but not for Baal. Psalm 68 verse 4 takes that exact title and applies it directly to Yahweh, proving the biblical writers did not ignore Baal. They invaded his identity, taking his most prestigious title and reassigning it to the true God of Israel. It was as if to say that everything Baal pretends to be, Yahweh actually is, because Baal did not ask Israel to change its beliefs. He simply asked Israel to hedge its bets, and that is what happened when he met Israel. The book of Judges records the moment of impact with devastating simplicity in chapter 2 verse 10, stating that after Joshua and his generation died, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, meaning it took exactly one generation for the children of the people who watched the Jordan River part, and the walls of Jericho collapsed to worship Baal. That is how fast it happened. But here is what almost everyone misses about this moment. Because Israel did not abandon Yahweh to embrace Baal, the book of Judges records that they actually served Yahweh and the Baals simultaneously without any shame. They kept the feasts, maintained the tabernacle, observed the Sabbath, and then, just in case, they also maintained the local altars on the hilltops, meaning they were not replacing their God, they were simply supplementing him, and the logic sounded incredibly reasonable. You pray to Yahweh for the covenant, for protection, and for the big picture. But for rain, for this season's wheat crop, and for the urgent question of whether your children will eat next month, you go straight to the local shrine. You use the one your neighbor uses, the one that has been producing results on this land for centuries, telling yourself you are not betraying God, you are just being practical, which is exactly how almost every compromise in human history begins. It does not start with a dramatic rejection of truth, but with a quiet addition that seems harmless. Because no Israelite farmer woke up one morning and renounced Yahweh. He simply said he believed in Yahweh, but also really needed some rain. It did not feel like betrayal. It felt like adaptation, as the shrines multiplied and scattered across every hilltop in the land, creating what the Bible calls high places, with stone altars, sacred pillars called masabot, and wooden poles representing Asherah. Local priests maintained the sites and performed the rituals, including feasting, drinking, and in some places, sexual rites performed as sympathetic magic, believing that if humans enacted fertility, Baal would automatically respond with much-needed fertility for the dry soil. The center of the system was one simple exchange, where you give Baal your sacrifice, and Baal gives you rain, completing the transaction, which started the vicious cycle that repeats 7 different times throughout the entire book of Judges. Israel worships Baal alongside Yahweh. God sends brutal oppression, they cry out. God sends a deliverer like Gideon, Deborah, or Samson. Peace follows, and then as soon as the harvest is at stake again, they return right back to the pagan altars. This happened 7 times as if the miracles had an expiration date. Because they did not replace God, they supplemented him, and that was worse. Though for centuries this stayed at the folk level with roadside altars, private hedging, and quiet compromise. Then one specific woman arrived, and compromise suddenly became a full conquest. Because in 874 BC, King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel married Jezebel, the wicked daughter of Ethbaal, who was the powerful king of the Sidonians. 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 31 shows this was not a political alliance with a religious complication. It was a religious revolution using a political marriage as its vehicle. As Jezebel arrived not as a quiet queen, but as a radical missionary. She brought with her 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, all funded directly from the royal treasury, eating at her table, while she commissioned the construction of a massive temple to Baal in Samaria. She began the systematic execution of Yahweh's prophets. In 1 Kings 18, verse 4 says, Obadiah, a devout servant of Yahweh, took 100 of the Lord's prophets and hid them in caves, 50 in one cave and 50 in another. He supplied them with bread and water to keep them alive, meaning the prophets of God were hiding in holes in the ground, while the false prophets of Baal ate from expensive royal plates right in the middle of the capital city. For the first time in Israel's history, Baal worship was not a local folk practice tolerated on the margins. It was official government policy, with state funding, royal protection, and an institutional clergy, which modern excavations in Samaria have completely confirmed. Archaeologists uncovered Ahab's palace containing beautiful ivories decorated with Phoenician Baal iconography, and a large ashlar block platform dating to the 9th century BC has been identified as a very strong candidate for Ahab's infamous and massive temple to Baal. Seal inscribed with the letters JZBL has been found, potentially being Jezebel's own personal seal, proving the playing field had not just tilted, it had completely inverted, as the faith of Abraham, Moses, and David was systematically exterminated. Prophets of Yahweh were hunted, the temples of Baal were funded, and the people were being told by their own government that the choice had already been made, leaving Israel exactly one generation away from forgetting Yahweh entirely forever. They were one generation from losing the name, the covenant, the story, everything Moses bled for in the wilderness, everything Joshua fought for at Jericho, and everything the judges died for, all about to be erased by a queen and a system. To this darkness stepped one man with no genealogy, no title, and no army, just a name, Elijah, and a declaration that there would be absolutely no rain in Israel except at his word. In 3.5 agonizing years passed. Drought Elijah announced was not a minor agricultural setback. It was a civilization-level crisis where crops were dead, livestock were dying, streams dried up, and a brutal famine had taken hold across the entire kingdom, devastating every single family. Every day of that drought was a public argument against Baal's core identity. Because the God of rain could not send rain, the prosperity God delivered nothing, and the insurance policy failed to pay out, answering their prayers with dead silence. When Elijah finally called for the confrontation, he chose Mount Carmel, a ridge overlooking the Mediterranean coast on the border between Yahweh's territory and Baal's Phoenician homeland, with simple terms of 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, and absolutely no fire allowed. The God who answers with fire is the real God, pitting one prophet against 450 in what was not a magic contest, but a very public bankruptcy hearing against a completely false and totally powerless pagan deity. Baal's prophets went first, preparing their bull and calling on the name of Baal from morning until noon, shouting for him to answer them, dancing and leaping around the altar. But the sky remained completely silent without a single cloud. Elijah began to brutally mock them, telling them to shout louder because surely he is a god, perhaps deep in thought, busy, traveling, or maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened, which was devastatingly precise and not generic taunting. In Baal's own mythology, the god literally dies and sleeps and must be revived. So Elijah was throwing their own theology back in their faces, saying your God is doing exactly what your own story says he does when he is dead. The prophets escalated, slashing themselves with swords and lances until blood ran down their arms, prophesying in a frenzy as hours passed, until 1 Kings chapter 18 verse 29 delivers the brutal verdict that there was absolutely no voice. No one answered, and no one paid attention. So Elijah repaired the broken altar of Yahweh with 12 stones, one for each tribe of a fractured nation, dug a trench around it, and had water poured over the sacrifice 3 times. The offering, the wood, and the trench were completely soaked, and he prayed one measured, direct prayer with no theatrics, no blood, and no screaming, just 33 words in the Hebrew language, and then the massive fire finally fell. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench, absolutely everything, causing the terrified people to fall on their faces and cry out that the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The 450 prophets of Baal were immediately seized and executed at the Kishon Valley. And that same evening, after 3.5 years of silence, Elijah's servant looked toward the sea 7 times before spotting a cloud. It was the size of a man's hand, and within the hour the sky was black with storm clouds and a heavy rain fell, proving God did not just defeat Baal on Carmel, He completely invaded Baal's own domain of sky. He proved that Baal had never been there in the first place, the throne room was empty, the insurance company had no assets, and the God of the storm was fiction, because the God of Israel was the actual storm. God sent fire from heaven, ended a 3.5-year drought, exposed Baal as nothing in front of the entire nation, and gave Israel every reason to never look at another altar again, leaving them completely stunned in awe. If you had been standing on Mount Carmel that day watching the fire fall and feeling the rain on your face for the first time in 3.5 years, would you have gone back to Baal? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because the shocking truth is that Israel actually did, and even though the fire fell, the rain returned, and Baal was exposed as nothing, which should have been the end of the story. Within one single generation, the altars were rebuilt. The archaeological record confirms Baal worship persisting in Israel for another century after Carmel, meaning 100 years of altar building after God had publicly, spectacularly, and definitively proven those altars worthless. Proving this was not ignorance, it was pure addiction. The prophets understood this, and they did not describe Baal worship with the language of theological error. They described it with the heartbreaking language of a shattered marriage, where God told the prophet Hosea to marry a prostitute named Gomer. She was a living metaphor for Israel, leaving him to run back to her lovers, while Hosea would bring her home again and again, because Israel was the unfaithful wife who could not stop cheating on the God who saved her. Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 20 says, "On every high hill and under every spreading tree, you lay down as a prostitute," and Ezekiel chapter 16 is one of the most graphic chapters in the entire Bible, describing God finding Israel. Found her as a newborn baby, abandoned in a field, still covered in blood, and He rescues her, raises her, clothes her, marries her, and she takes every single gift He gave her and offers it directly to foreign gods. Reason Israel kept going back to Baal is the reason any person keeps returning to the thing they know is destroying them. Not because it is better, but because it is easier, since Baal only asks for a simple performance. You show up, sacrifice, participate, go home, and the transaction is complete. But Yahweh asks for something far more terrifying, asking for the heart, the whole heart, not a ritual, but a relationship, and not a performance, but total surrender. And surrender is harder than sacrifice, it always has been, which is why century after century, Israel chose the transaction over the relationship, the insurance policy over the covenant, and the physical altar over the invisible God who demanded absolutely everything. The prophets warned them, and God sent judgment through foreign armies, famine, and plague. But time after time, Israel would repent, return, and then drift back to the altars, as the cycle spun deeper until the corruption reached its final destination. In the northern kingdom, Baal worship led to complete spiritual collapse, and 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 16 names the cause explicitly, stating they forsook all the commands of the Lord their God and worshipped Baal, leading to their ultimate destruction. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire swept through and scattered the 10 northern tribes, carrying them away never to return, while in the southern kingdom of Judah, King Manasseh reigned for 55 long and dark years. He built altars to Baal inside the temple of Yahweh itself, erected a wooden Asherah pole in the Holy of Holies, and practiced horrific child sacrifice in the Valley of Hinnom, taking the transaction Baal normalized to its absolute darkest end. Even Josiah's sweeping reforms, tearing down every high place, burning every Asherah pole, and defiling the Topheth, could not reverse the massive damage, because within 23 years of Josiah's death, Every altar had been rebuilt and every shrine was restored. Fire from heaven was not enough, and that sentence alone should terrify you, because miracles could not cure what had become a deep addiction. So God chose radical surgery, and in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's army breached Jerusalem, the beautiful temple that Solomon had built, where every surface once gleamed with gold and every chamber was thick with incense, where the glory of God descended in a cloud so heavy the priests could not stand, was burned to the ground. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared from history. The people were marched to Babylon in heavy chains. The land was emptied and the city was rubble. But the prophet Ezekiel had already described something worse happening before the armies even arrived. In Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11, the glory of Yahweh, the visible luminous presence that inhabited the temple since Solomon, begins to move, rising from the cherubim above the ark, moving to the threshold and pausing like a presence lingering. It pauses at the edge of a place it loves before it leaves, then moves east slowly, rests above the Mount of Olives, looking back at Jerusalem one final time, and then it is gone, with no thunder, just absolute absence. Most devastating judgment God ever rendered on Israel was not a plague or an army, it was his departure, meaning when Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers set the temple on fire, they were just burning a building that had already been completely vacated. God who built it had already walked out. But here is what makes the exile the most important chapter in this story, and the one almost nobody talks about. Because after 70 years in Babylon, it actually completely worked. The Jewish people returned to the land under the decree of Cyrus the Great, rebuilt the temple, restored the priesthood, and re-established the feasts. And the astonishing fact is that they never worshiped Baal again. Ever. Not even a single time. The post-exilic community had many problems like legalism, hypocrisy, political corruption, and compromised priesthoods. But Baal worship was not one of them, because the 600-year addiction was finally broken when God treated the root cause, not the symptom. He removed the patient from the environment feeding the disease, taking away the land, the harvests, and the agricultural anxiety that drove Israel to Baal. Because in Babylon, there were no hilltop altars or local farmers offering practical poison-laced advice. There was no rain to pray for on Canaanite soil, and the entire ecosystem of temptation was gone, meaning the exile was not just punishment, it was surgery where God cut out the tumor by cutting away the promised land itself. It took the destruction of the nation to save the nation, proving how deep the infection went. And while miracles couldn't break the addiction, total loss finally did, breaking the cycle. But before you exhale, there is something you need to hear. Baal worship ended in 586 BC. The altars are rubble, the high places are dust, and the shrines are archaeological sites behind ropes and placards, meaning the system is completely dead, except it actually is not dead. Baal was never primarily about a statue. He was a system, a structure, and an architecture of exchange, where you give your devotion to the thing that promises to give you what you need, you perform, and the God delivers the results. The transaction is the relationship. And if the God does not deliver, you find one that will, which is the true essence of Baal. And if you strip away the bronze and the incense, what remains is a structure still running today. Will promise prosperity, rain for your fields, food for your family, and economic security. So where does that altar stand today? It stands in the office at midnight, in the career that owns you, and in the account balance you constantly check. It stands wherever a person treats financial security as the highest good and arranges everything in their life, their time, their relationships, their health, and their God, completely around the modern and demanding altar of endless productivity and massive wealth accumulation. Baal promised visible, immediate results, where you perform the ritual and get the rain. And today that altar stands wherever someone has reduced their faith to transactions, saying, I went to church, I tithed, I prayed, now where is my blessing? That specific sentence is Baal's liturgy perfectly translated into modern English. And since Baal also promised community belonging, where every neighbor and family was doing it, that altar now stands wherever the pressure to conform overrides the call to be set apart. It stands wherever the fear of being different, excluded or seen as strange, keeps a person kneeling at the altar everyone else uses instead of the one God actually built. Because Israel did not fall for Baal because they were stupid people. They fell because Baal was practical, and practical gods are the hardest to kill, meaning they did not reject Yahweh because Baal was more true. They drifted because Baal was more responsive, offering visible rituals, immediate sensory rewards, and absolutely no waiting. There was no mystery and no faith required, while Yahweh demanded something far more frightening, which was trust in the unseen, patience with his timing, and total surrender to a master plan that they could not possibly control with their simple sacrifices. And that is the exact question you face right now, not as ancient history or a Bible study exercise, but right now in the life you are living today. What is the specific system you actually trust more than you trust God? What is the altar you quietly maintain just in case? And what is the thing you would never call an idol, but that occupies the exact place in your heart that was originally built for something else entirely in your spiritual life? Hosea chapter 2 verse 16 contains one of the most tender lines in the Old Testament, where God says, "In that day you will call me my husband, and you will no longer call me my master," revealing his true loving heart. The Hebrew word for master is Baali, and God wants to remove even the word Baal from the relationship, not because the word is evil, since it simply means Lord, but because the transaction, performance, and exchange is a complete spiritual corruption. Does not want to be Israel's vendor. He wants to be Israel's husband, not a God who delivers on demand, but a God who is intimately present, completely faithful, and deeply loving, regardless of whether the physical rain actually comes or not. Baal was a dying and rising God, and every year his worshippers perform the cycle where Baal dies in the summer and rises in the autumn. A seasonal myth repeated endlessly that resolved absolutely nothing permanently for the desperate people worshiping him. Then a real man walked out of Galilee, healed the sick, raised the dead, and stood before a Roman cross, dying not in myth but in actual history, witnessed, documented, and buried behind a Roman seal for the entire world to see. And on the third day he rose, not in a seasonal cycle or a ritual reenactment, but once for all, forever, meaning everything Baal pretended to offer, like life after death and the renewal of a broken world, Christ actually delivered perfectly. Cheap counterfeit died in a dark valley outside Jerusalem, but the true original rose from a stone tomb outside that exact same city. And while every army that fought Israel eventually retreated, like Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, Baal never retreated once. He was only starved out, not by a stronger army or a better argument, but by the total loss of everything Israel had. And even after exile broke the cycle, the dark system survived, shedding the name, but keeping the exact architecture. It is still running today, and the only question is whether you recognize the altar you are standing on. So which version of Baal are you still feeding? The career that owns you, the transaction you call faith, or the fear of being different? Tell me in the comments and be honest. Not with me, but with yourself, because I read every single one. And if this video opens something you had never seen before, please share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. Make sure to subscribe to Bible Origins, because we do not just read ancient history on this channel, we actively decipher the hidden blueprint behind it all. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.